Well, the BBC has just aired an explosive interview with Prince Andrew's accuser, Virginia Giuffre.
Now, here with all the details is New Idea Royals commentator Angela Mollard.
Hi.
Angela, good morning to you. Now, this tell-all was shot before Prince Andrew's infamous interview. That's important to know. And Virginia wasn't shy on details about her first night with Prince Andrew. Let's take a look now.
He is the most hideous dancer I've ever seen in my life. I mean, it was horrible, and this guy was sweating all over me. Like, his sweat was like, it was raining basically everywhere, and I was just like, whoa, grossed out from it. But I knew I had to keep him happy because that's what Giuffre and Ghislaine would expect from me.
So this is in stark contrast to what Prince Andrew claims.
It's complete opposite of what he's claiming. I mean, she's very credible. She's very detailed in it. She says that after that night, they go back to Ghislaine Maxwell's house, Jeffrey Epstein's girlfriend slash madam, and that at that place they go upstairs, they have a bath, they go on to have very short-lived sex. He says thank you afterwards and leaves. So she doesn't feel at any time that she's embellishing it. She's very quiet and she talks through it in detail, but as I say, she comes across very credibly.
Now, Virginia claims she was forced to sleep with Prince Andrew 3 times and revealed startling details of her alleged second encounter with the Duke of York. Have a listen.
Having tea, and Andrew is talking about Fergie, which is his ex-wife at that point, and Ghislaine's bad-mouthing Fergie as well, and Epstein's just socially awkward, so I think he's just laughing about everything, and I'm sitting there like I was always told to do, is sit there, don't talk unless you're talked to, and be polite and laugh at everything that someone says when they're trying to be funny.
Okay, so as you say, quite specific. This seems quite careless. I mean, could be accused of many, many things, but at the very least, quite careless.
Quite careless to talk around someone that you've only just met, about your ex-wife, these sorts of details. And of course, you know, living in London through the 90s, everyone was bringing newspapers to the story that I was, to the newspaper I was working with. So if he talked about Fergie, you know, this woman could, so really poor lack of judgment at the very least from Andrew. But what I really thought about Virginia throughout this interview is that the anecdotes were so specific. They were very particular in their details. They didn't feel contrived or made up. They felt like, I have to say, that they were true.
She mentions that infamous photo which seemingly proved that they were together. And first, let's remind ourselves of what Prince Andrew said of this image.
From the investigations that we've done, you can't prove whether or not that photograph is faked or not, because it is a photograph of a photograph of a photograph. That's me, but whether that's my hand or whether that's the position, I have simply no recollection.
Okay, but Virginia
has a recollection. In fact, she says that the photograph, on the back of the photograph, because this is in the days, obviously, when you had to get them developed, that there's a date on the back of that photograph, and it's the 13th of March 2001, which was 2 days after she asked them to take the photo of her with Andrew. This was after they'd been to the nightclub and they went back to Ghislaine Maxwell's house, and that photograph was taken. What's also interesting is that Andrew's people didn't start investigating or looking at whether this photograph was fraudulent until just recently, whereas it came out in 2015. They didn't start looking at it then. So it's only as the allegations have gained more momentum that the palace has actually gone, oh, it's even suggested that it might have been fraudulent. There was no suggestion of fraudulence at the time.
So the interview made mention of some inconsistencies in Virginia's story, and she admits that her memory may be just a little bit foggy. Can she afford to be inaccurate at any point here? Because there's a lot of people looking at this and digging very deep.
Look, I actually thought it was more credible that she did say that that there were inconsistencies, that she's trying to remember, because it is a long time ago. What was interesting about the show is that there was another woman speaking on it who corroborated a lot of the things that she was saying, that the stories rang true when you place them against each other. And this is, of course, what's happening with the investigation in America, is that they've got multiple girls giving similar information, which is what led to Epstein being in prison in the first place. Now, that doesn't mean that Andrew is guilty at this stage, obviously, but there was enough evidence there to corroborate the story against Epstein, and hence why he was waiting trial on that. So look, I think what's really interesting also is there's a interchange. The night that Virginia speaks to the Mail on Sunday back in 2015, there's an email at 5:50 a.m. between Prince Andrew to Ghislaine Maxwell saying they need to talk about Virginia Roberts. Now, that's not come out before. Panorama, the program, has gone through all the paperwork, found this email. Now, to me, that email needs further discussion. What happened after that? There's so many questions unanswered, but it's just going to rumble. What happens next, I think, is critical.
Well, Virginia, is calling on the British public to support her. Let's take a look at what she said.
I implore the citizens in the UK to stand up beside me, to help me fight this fight, to not accept this as being okay. This is not some sordid sex story. This is a story of being trafficked. This is a story of abuse. And this is a story of your guys' royalty.
And what happens here? What does the palace do with all of this? Do they respond? Do we hear from them on that?
Well, who knows? Look, Andrew's given 2 statements already. He's given the interview. None of that has done him any favours. I mean, if you were the Queen right now, I'd be, as his mother, calling him in and going, I need to know the honest truth here. There's just so many inconsistencies. And what does happen next? I mean, there's a lot of talk about the fact that Ghislaine Maxwell, the woman that was working in cahoots with Epstein and was his girlfriend and was the one that was procuring these girls. And this is what's really interesting about Virginia Giuffre, is that she was a very vulnerable, sexually abused as a child, young girl. They latched on, as she tells it, they latched onto her vulnerability. And Epstein was procuring girls from schools and things like that. So look, it's a really grubby, really dirty story. It's not going to go away. Look, there's some suggestion that if Andrew steps foot in America, he would be subpoenaed, because 5 girls there have in their witness statements insisted that he be subpoenaed. So interesting to see what he does next.
Just to point out to everybody at home as well, this is the BBC Panorama show, which is highly credible and is in fact the show that Princess Diana chose to speak to when she made that infamous "there are 3 people in this marriage" comment. That was the Panorama show.
It's a very celebrated, credible show. And look, I'll tell you about this. One thing about this show, it's not just sticking a microphone in front of a girl. What they've done is they've forensically gone and looked at the evidence around this. They've cut and spliced vision of Epstein and things he said. Look, it's a very convincing, it lands very convincingly on the side of Virginia from my perspective.
All right, Ange, thank you very much for that.
Thanks.
More to come, for sure.
For sure.